All right, everyone, it is 7 o'clock, so let's get started. My name is Lee Dixon. I represent 1CO2, and I will be the chair of the Planning, Zoning, and Transportation Committee for the next year. Serving with me is Jake Falaschini, representing 1CO7, Margaret Stevens, representing 1CO5, and Joe Van Wy, representing 1CO4. So on the agenda tonight, we have two items. We're going to hear about the residential conversion at the Universal buildings, specifically as it pertains to zoning relief measures. And then we're going to hear from Diane Romo-Thomas on the Rock and Roll DC Half Marathon and 5K scheduled for Saturday, March 18th, 2023. So before we get started on that first item, I did want to put something in the chat. We received an email from the District Department of Transportation. They're conducting a positive truck bus signage study to understand the benefits and costs of installing new signage in support of a potential mandatory truck bus route system. And they're using this information to develop recommendations for next steps. So I'm just going to put this in the chat here. Feel free to fill this out on your own time or after the meeting. And with that, I think we're ready to move on to the first item on the agenda. So, Sean, can you make Abigail Brady, Josh Goulbart, Zach Williams, Erwin Andres, and Stephen Ike panelists? And if all of you could actually raise your hand so it's easier for Sean to find you, that'd be very helpful.
Thank you all so much. We'll do.
And once you're all here, Abigail Brady, I believe the floor is yours, or Josh.
Hey, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Abigail, I think, is just driving the show. I'm just introducing our team here to get us started. So great to meet you. People I have not met directly. I know you've met most of our team already, and we presented a few times, so we're excited to do so again. And tonight we want to, we're here to present just our specific asks, which are zoning special exceptions and some public space permits that we are seeking ANC support for before our BZA hearing, which is March 15th. And this is for 1825-75 Connecticut. And joining me tonight are the people that Lee just mentioned. And I'm going to let Zach take it from here with the next section of our presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh, and good evening to the committee again. My name is Zach Williams. I'm a land use attorney with Venable, and I'm going to be walking through the presentation tonight, focusing specifically on the zoning relief that we're seeking, and then I'll hand it over to Erwin Andres to speak to transportation, and we will then hand it over to the landscape consultants to speak to streetscape. So in the interest of time and at the request of the committee, I'm going to just walk quickly through these elevations just to sort of set the context for discussing the zoning relief. And what you see here is the perspective of the site from Florida Ave looking towards Connecticut and seeing what will be the new entranceway there. That's where the current theater building is that will be demolished. You also have a viewpoint here of the penthouse on the south wing there at the top, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. Next, please. This perspective is looking down Florida Ave from the opposite direction. You are sitting from the viewpoint of the camera, you're at the intersection of Connecticut and Florida, looking at the sort of that point there at Connecticut and Florida, and looking towards where the new entrance will be. There's a couple of features I want to point out here that we'll talk about in a few minutes. First are the solariums at every corner that Gary Handel talked about at our last presentation to bring in light to those upper units and upper spaces. There's also those upper terraces. You can see little cutout areas on the upper floors. Those are courts under the zoning regulation, and we will talk a little bit about that in a minute as well. Next slide. This perspective is at Connecticut Ave, the facade on Connecticut Avenue, looking north along Connecticut Ave. And you can see here again Prominent are the solariums as well as the terraces. That is a feature that goes along the building, around the entire building, on all three sides. And you can also see the penthouse again on the the south building wing. And here what you can see, what I want to point out, is the way that penthouse is pulled back from that, the tip of the site, the corner between Florida Ave and Connecticut. The penthouse at the upper level is pulled almost to halfway back at that south building wing. Next slide. And finally, this is the perspective looking at the T Street facade, looking at Connecticut, on the north side of Connecticut, looking down the grade. Here again, you see that those terraces at the upper levels continuing. Each of those is a court. Each of those involves an element of zoning relief. You can also see here between the two building wings that large separation, which is a court as well. It's actually not an entire separation. As we mentioned previously, the buildings are connected at multiple levels, but that's still considered a court that also requires some zoning relief as well. Next. So now getting into the specifics of what we'll be asking the BZA to approve in March. We're asking for 3 different elements of zoning relief. Each of them can be approved with a special exception. A special exception under the DC zoning regulations is generally approved as long as 2 standards are met. I'll get into those in a second. The 3 special exceptions that we're seeking are minimum penthouse setbacks. So we're seeking a special exception to vary what would otherwise be required for the penthouses. For minimum court width and area, and the courts again are those terraces at the top level, as well as that separation between the original 2 buildings, which have now been connected. And finally, side yards. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Next. The BZA will look to really 2 standards generally when reviewing a special exception. The first is the relief in harmony with the zone? Is it in harmony with the zoning regulations? This zone for this property is MU9B zone. It's a mixed use zone. And it allows heights up to 100 feet with inclusionary zoning units. The second standard is whether the relief would affect neighboring properties. And typically we look at light, air, and privacy when we're considering what those impacts might be. Next slide. So turning to the penthouse setbacks, there are elements of relief that are required on both building wings in various locations. The primary reason for the relief is really the primary reason for all the relief that we're seeking is that this is a conversion project. This is a conversion of a 50s era, 60s era office building into residential. And because of that, there are challenges on the ground. There's challenges with the existing buildings in designing what will be a residential building. And that ultimately leads to the need for zoning relief in a number of different ways. That's the number one reason we need this relief. The existence of the buildings and the conversion of the buildings, the types of things that lead to relief are the structural layout of the building, the footprint of the building. The building has a face on all 3 sides of this block. The existing building layout, one of the north building wing is fairly narrow. Because of that, the penthouse setback relief is required. If you were to put the setback relief that's required, you would hardly have any room on that north building wing for a penthouse at all. Further, the penthouses that are currently on the buildings today are not in conformance. Those wouldn't be approved today. And so I think that speaks to the fact that as these buildings as built with penthouses back in the 50s and 60s weren't in conformance either and aren't in conformance today. Finally, the setback relief, as we'll get into as I show the diagrams, it's mainly inward facing to the site. And what I mean by that is where the greatest relief is needed are on the sides of the building that face inward rather than outward. And so that mitigates impacts that there might be on the view shed or otherwise on neighboring properties. Next slide. So turning now to these slides, and this is just to show in detail what the relief is that we're seeking. What you see today, what you see on this slide is what exists today, current penthouses. And you can see on that north building wing, that penthouse doesn't have any setback at all. along that interior court. And there's other elements that are also not in conformance. So that's how the penthouses sit today. Next slide. These are the penthouses as proposed on the new project. As you can see, the north building wing still has a penthouse that is really right along that edge, but that's all on that interior court. All of that, again, is inward facing to the site. Much of that won't even be visible from a lot of the neighboring properties and parcels. On the south building wing, the penthouse is pulled all the way to the north of the building. So there's relief that's needed on the court. What that allows for is a much larger setback on the front part of the building, which is really the most prominent part of the building from a view shed perspective. And that allows that building to remain open for amenity space. And it also protects ultimately that view shed at the most prominent corner of the building. Next slide, please. This just shows with a little bit more detail exactly what the relief is. So the shaded area is where the setbacks would otherwise be required for these penthouses. And so you can see exactly what the variation is. And you can also see here again, where the greatest variation is facing interior to where that interior separation, that court is between the buildings. Next slide, please. And I just want to say I'm walking through this pretty quickly. We can come back if there's questions. In the interest of time, I'm moving through it quickly. I know that folks have seen this already, so I don't want to belabor it. Unless there's questions, we can come back. The second element of relief are courts, and I've mentioned them a few times. The largest court, the most prominent court, already exists today. It exists between the two building wings, and because we're extending the buildings, that's a court that needs zoning relief. The other courts are all along the very top levels of the new top levels of the building. So from an impacts perspective, they're at the highest levels. They should create the least amount of impact, certainly almost no impact at the street level. And at the view shed, it's at the highest angles of the building. And as Gary explained in his presentation, the idea of those courts is to improve the aesthetics of the building, improve the view shed, for various reasons. And we believe that for that reason, there wouldn't be any impacts. Actually, it's actually an improvement and to include those cutouts. But those are also needed for structural reasons and for layout reasons and mechanical reasons as well. With the existing buildings, again, there's challenges in converting a building from this era into a residential building. And because of that, this is one of the areas of relief that we need. Next slide. So I'm just going to walk through here each one of the courts. As you can see, this is that court as it exists today. And we can share these slides. It's a little hard to orient if you haven't seen it before. Our team is used to this, but I'm sure seeing it maybe for the first time is a little bit confusing. But what we're showing here is that shaded blue. That is the court. That is considered a court. And if you kind of visualize that exists between the two buildings, on the upper left diagram, you can see like that's the cut where that diagram is taking from, the cutout view. That's where that court exists today. Next slide. And this is what the court looks like when we add the additional levels onto the building. The required measurement for a court is dependent on the height of the court. So when you increase the height, the other requirements of the court also increase. So that's why we need the zoning relief. Obviously, we can't expand the building area. So this is relief that is very much a part of the fact that we're converting existing buildings in place. Next slide. The remainder of the courts are all those little terraces, those little cutouts at each of those areas along the building at the highest levels of the building. And because of the layout and the dimensions of the building, they're not all exactly the same. But you saw them in each of those renderings that I showed at the top of the presentation. The exact relief that's needed is shown in shaded red at the top right diagram. In most cases, it's a couple of feet. It's minor, but it's a technical thing in the zoning regulations, and it's considered a court technically. And so this is zoning relief that we need in order to accomplish the design that we are seeking for this building. Also, of course, to accommodate the existing buildings and the existing structural and mechanical. Next slide. This is just showing what the courts along that interior, the large interior court. The dimension's slightly different there. Again, the buildings are slightly different as you go around. It's the same feature, if you will. It's just a slightly different sized court there. Next slide. Finally, side yards. So this one is pretty straightforward. Technically, you're required to have, if you have a side yard in the MU9B zone, you have to have a certain type of side yard. Even though this building touches the property line on each of the three sides, it doesn't touch it contiguously. And so in this zone, that's considered a side, it's providing side yards. None of those are in conformance, that you couldn't build the building today the way it is without zoning relief. And it doesn't make sense to try to incorporate side yards. We believe it doesn't make sense to incorporate side yards only at the highest levels. It would look weird and it wouldn't really accomplish what the purpose of the side yards is to begin with. So we need zoning relief not to create new side yards, but just to extend where those building walls already are for the new areas of the building. Again, this is kind of going back to my main point. When you're converting a building that's in place, these are some of the challenges that you're stuck with. You're stuck with sort of strange zoning quirks. And this is one of those things. The only way to really do this the right way is to get this zoning relief. And, sort of on the other items as well, this is, again, at the highest level of the building where the relief is needed. It's only at the highest levels, the new construction. So in terms of an impact perspective, you should have the least amount of impact for view sheds and around neighboring properties. Next slide, please. This is the survey, and this just shows what I was talking about. You can see that the building sort of touches the property line. This is the existing building, and that shaded area in red is where that theater building is. That's coming out. Everything else is staying. Here, the side yards are considered Connecticut Ave and T Street. Okay, so you can see that the building, even though it touches those lines, it doesn't touch contiguously. So technically, you're required to provide greater side yards. And the relief, that's what we're requesting, is just to keep them exactly the way they are. And they have been since the 50s and 60s. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Erwin Andrus to speak to some of the public space relief that we're requesting.
Great, thanks, Zach. Good evening. My name is Erwin Andrus, principal of Gross Slate Associates. I believe I'm going to go through these two slides pretty relatively quickly. Given that we are replacing existing office with residential, office per square foot generates more traffic than residential per square foot. In addition to that, we're reducing the amount of retail on the block and reducing the number of parking spaces. We believe the number of parking spaces is appropriate and adequate. But the net resultant of these changes significantly improves the condition surrounding the site, because the amount of traffic that's being generated by the projected development it decreases substantially. Next slide. As part of our coordination with DDOT and the ANC, we are going to the Public Space Committee for conceptual curb cut approval. As part of that hearing, we are requesting that DDOT consider and approve our proposed curb cuts. And just to be clear, what this graphic shows are the curb cuts that we are looking to get approved. Starting on T Street, the existing condition, there are two curb cuts that are 39 feet in width, separated by a 6-foot median. What we're proposing is one 30-foot curb cut that's separated by a 6-foot median, and a 24-foot curb cut that's intended to serve the loading associated with that residential wing. Given that we are no longer an office building, the need to provide loading for the residents is an important aspect, especially since the wings are relatively far apart. Along the Florida Avenue side, there's an existing curb cut that's 44 feet in width. And there currently right now, there's no parking essentially from the existing crosswalk to the edge of this curb cut. As a result, because of the fact that we are looking for 3 curb cuts, one 18-foot curb cut that's inbound only, one 18-foot curb cut that's outbound right turn only, and one 24-foot curb cut, which is intended to serve the proposed loading facility. What's important is that as part of this request, we are not removing any on-street parking along Florida Avenue. So as a result, we believe that these elements are critical to the way the site will be served. The two blue curb cuts on Florida Avenue is intended to serve the pedestrian plaza, the entry plaza, which provides access for the front doors of some of the residential components, as well as access into the garage. What's also important about this plaza is that it's intended to mitigate any of the impacts associated with vehicles such as taxis or Ubers and Lyfts that would find its place on the public street. The intent is to bring those vehicles onto the site so that stacking and that queuing condition can happen on site. And so with that, we, as part of our request this evening, we are looking for the ANC support for these curb cuts. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the landscape architect.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Stephen Ike with Hollander Design Landscape Architects. We're very happy to be working in Washington, D.C. Once again, our last project was the Kennedy Center expansion, so happy to be working on such a prominent site for the neighborhood. Just to talk a little bit about the landscape as a whole, you know, one of the things that's really important to us as landscape architects, and also equally shared by Post Brothers and the architects, is that the identity in the landscape doesn't begin at the front door of a building, but actually should extend all the way to the curb. And so we really want to be able to elevate the streetscape design to a level that is in keeping with the improvements and enhancements that are proposed for this conversion of office building to residential building. Next slide, please. So looking at how we consider enhancing the streetscape experience for the pedestrian, we have 6 main points here. The first is really maximizing the tree canopy across the entire streetscape experience. Currently, we have 26 street trees surrounding the property. With the reconfiguration of the street tree boxes, we look to increase that number to 29 along the curb line. We'd also like to plant trees within the property boundaries alongside the sidewalk at Florida Avenue in order to mitigate those zones where street trees just cannot occur, in order to create a continuous canopy coverage of shade across the sidewalk. We'll also work with city agencies to enhance the street lighting through new lamp posts along Florida Avenue and T Street to align with the Connecticut Avenue improvement plans that have been proposed, and look to centralize the parking meters at key locations so that we just begin to declutter the sidewalk for pedestrian use. In doing this work with the meters, we also were able to strategically locate short-term bicycle racks where it makes the most sense near retail entries, the building entries, and also at the intersections of these streets. And lastly, and what we are seeking ANC support on specifically on, is the installation of ADA compliant specialty paving that will look to be either a natural stone or a concrete product that the owner fully recognizes that they will be responsible for maintenance and repair moving forward into the future. Next slide, please. And on this next slide, I'm actually going to hand it back over to Zach to talk about some of the building projections on our site plan.
Thanks, Stephen. There's a couple of aspects of this, the public space requests that go back to the same type of reasons we needed the relief for the zoning, and that is existing conditions on the site. There are a couple of areas where there are projections of this building, and what that means is it goes slightly over the property line into public space. We're talking about inches or a foot or two. It's very minimal. And while approved originally, we have to get that approved again as part of this project. So here there is, you can see there's an existing building projection on Florida at that corner of the entrance, the new entrance that's existing. We're keeping it as is. There's a new building projection at the east corner on the T Street facade, right there. That is, it's essentially nominal. The building as it sits today is either right on the line or just an inch or two over. When you take that old facade on and put the new facade on with current regulations and current requirements, it might go slightly over a couple of inches. We're still not exactly sure, but because it could slightly go over the line, that's something we're technically required to get approval for. It's in a lot of ways is an existing condition that by means of a conversion might be slightly increased. We're talking about inches. And then we have another new building projection on the Connecticut Ave side. Again, this is the same thing with the new facade. We're talking about very nominal projection here. It's something that's required to be approved by public space, but it really isn't changing really anything much about the building, except that we're converting from office to residential. There's also some vaults that exist today. A vault is just space underground underneath the public space. Those are currently existing. There's one there along the T Street, northern T Street facade. There's parking spaces in there now, and we'd like to just keep them as is. DDOT has asked us to put some bike parking there. We'd rather have the bike parking close to the elevators. That's something that we'll need to work out. We're trying to just keep it exactly as it's always been. And then there's an existing Pepco vault as well, a little bit further to the east on T Street. Again, already there, and we intend to keep it that way. Those were approved originally, but because we have a new project here, we have to go through that and get that technical approval again. So that's part of our request as well. I'll hand it back to you, Stephen.
Thank you. So just to talk a little bit further about the tree specifically, with the increase of trees to 29, that does mean that we are looking to reconfigure and relocate the tree boxes surrounding the site. But what that does allow us to do is actually increase the size of the tree boxes to the minimum required sizes now by DDOT. It also allows us to install larger caliber trees. So we've had preliminary discussions with the forester, done a preliminary walk around the site, and are in talks about installing trees up to 6 to 7 inches in caliper surrounding the site. In addition, it allows, like I said, a more continuous line of street trees surrounding the property. And sorry, I lost my train of thought on that. And then the last thing I just wanted to point out again was the street trees along Florida Avenue, just inside the curb line, to create that more continuous line of street tree presence. Moving on to the next slide. Here, this takes a look at the kind of proposed landscape design and enlargement of the curb cuts along Florida Avenue. As Erwin mentioned earlier, we have a 24-foot wide curb cut at the service entry to the west, and then the two 18-foot wide curb cuts serving the vehicular access to the parking garage and drop off, as well as used by taxi and Uber drivers. So you can see along the within the planting beds there, we have a continuous run of 5 shade trees just inside the property line to further provide that shade and relief for pedestrian use. Materials and paving materials proposed at the sidewalks are continuing across those curb cuts to provide preference to the pedestrians in terms of use of the sidewalk. The next slide. Next slide looks at an enlargement of those similar conditions along T Street for the north wing of this tower of the project, including a 24-foot wide service entry to the east, and then the 30-foot wide curb cut with 6-foot islands to the west for the vehicular entry and access. Next slide. So overall, just looking at this graphic, kind of more image representation, what this means for the streetscape. The top left image really shows that presence of a continuous line of street trees, a larger size, with the addition of vegetation at the ground plane. So one of the things that's really important to us is to make sure that the vegetation and the plantings and this beautification doesn't happen just within the property boundaries, but also extends out all the way to the curb line. Another thing that we're looking at is, again, that specialty paving. So it could be similar to unique paving patterns that are seen with that bottom center image, but with a much cleaner, more ADA accessible paving installation like the top right image. And next page. Lastly, I just want to talk about the overall look and feel of the plantings throughout the site. You know, it's really important for us that this look good year round. So we're always paying careful attention to bloom times and cycles. So we have things that look beautiful from early spring all the way through winter with evergreen plantings. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation. Again, I'm just astonished by all of the careful considerations that you've put into the design of this building and the surrounding landscape. It's really impressive. I did have one question, Stephen. At some point in your portion of the presentation, you said seeking support for ADA compliant paving or natural stone or concrete product that would be used around the entire building and the public sidewalks. Is that correct?
That is correct. So we're proposing a unit paver, like an 18 by 30 inch paver that's laid in a running bond pattern. The standard is a poured in place concrete sidewalk. So it is a specialty paver, but again, it's something that is pretty widely approved and seen all over Washington, D.C.
Great. I don't have any questions. I thought your presentation answered the ones that I had, specifically about how the penthouses would be facing. You said they're mostly facing inwards where you would need the zoning relief. So I pass it on to committee members if you have any questions to ask. Commissioner Palaschini.
Thank you. The one thing that I was raising my hand in earlier was just to acknowledge that I believe that you said the penthouse on the facing out to Connecticut could actually run even further down towards Florida and Connecticut by, it looked like probably somewhere between 40 to 50 feet that you've then trimmed that back. And so whatever extra relief that you're requesting in square footage terms along the northern and western side is less than, in fact, you could extend that further south if you so desired by right, correct?
That's correct.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, if
And
there's
just
no...
Echoing Lee's comments that this is very thoughtful, a very wonderful design. Happy to welcome it to the neighborhood.
Commissioner Van Wy.
Thank you. I do want to echo what my fellow commissioners have already said. Really appreciate the presentation and the attention to detail here. Quick question. I think you covered this at the general meeting, but I neglected to jot down the answer to this question. How many units do you expect to have qualified for inclusionary zoning in this development?
Josh, I can take that unless you want to take it. All right, I'll take it.
No, sorry. I'm sorry, Joe. Someone was texting me and I was responding to them.
Okay. You want to take it, Josh, or you want me to take it?
Would you mind just repeating it really quickly? I'm so sorry.
How many inclusionary zoning units are we planning to have?
Oh, how many are we planning to have? Yes, Zach, please go ahead.
Yeah, so we're still working out the layouts. So we don't know exactly what the square footage will be, but it will be compliant with what they are required under the zoning regulations. It's really just a calculation, and it's dependent on what the final square footage is in the building.
Exactly. We think it's a great program. We're really excited to be able. We think it's great. Other cities that we've worked in haven't had that as an option, and we think it's a wonderful way to be able to, make this great for everybody.
Good. Yeah, and just happy to hear, once you have that number, be great to have it just so we're aware. But
Yep.
very happy that it's something that's top of mind and yeah, big fan of it as well.
Of course.
Thank you. That's everything for me.
Okay, great. We're going to open it up to public comment now if anyone has any questions. Okay, so I guess there's no public comment. Sean, let me know if anyone speaks up. So yeah, I guess the next step would be for us to collectively decide as a committee if we want to bring this to the next full ANC meeting to offer our support. Does anyone want to motion to do that?
I would move to move this to our ANC meeting in February with the committee's support.
Would anyone like to second that?
I can second that.
And just to clarify, when I say with our support, I mean support for all of the support written out in a letter from the ANC to the commission, supporting all of the requested zoning relief as needed for the presentation that we received today.
So we'll take a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those not in favor say no. All right, the ayes have it unanimously, and so we will bring this up at the next full ANC meeting. I want to thank you all again for coming to yet another meeting to talk about this wonderful product or this wonderful project. We really appreciate it. We are genuinely excited about it, as I'm sure you are as well. So thank you again for coming to, from my experience at least, it's been 3 meetings, but it's been very helpful each time to hear from you.
We're happy to do it. We're equally excited, and thanks for letting us, have this discussion with you. And we can't wait to get started. So
great, thank you. So I'm going to bring this item on our agenda to a close, and we can move on to the presentation by Diane Romo Thomas. Could you raise your hand so Sean could make you a panelist?
All right. You can hear me.
The floor is yours.
Okay. Let me come out of this. I apologize. I've been having problems with the audio on my laptop. So I apologize. Can you hear me okay, first of all? Okay, excellent. I'm going to be real quick. You guys probably very familiar with this event, the Rock and Roll Half Marathon and 5K, running Saturday, March 18th. This is the 15th year for this event and the 12th year I've been in front of you guys or this commission on this particular event. This event used to have a full marathon, if you remember, that was dropped a couple of years ago. So it's now only a half, and that marathon, the full will not come back. We expect about 12,000 half marathon runners and probably about 2,000 to 3,000 in the 5K, which you won't see runners in the 5K. The event starts at 14th and Constitution, and this year we have a new finish line. We will finish at Pennsylvania and 3rd back downtown. We have historically finished at RFK, and this year with the plan development at RFK, we kind of had to think ahead and move that finish line. So we are going to be finishing up. I know I did send a packet with the map, and I'm on my phone right now, so I can't easily pull that up for you, so I apologize. So I'll get to the direct impact for you guys. So this event, the runners will be coming, like I said, it starts at 14th Constitution, runs through Foggy Bottom area, gets into Rock Creek Parkway, and runs up northbound on Rock Creek Park, comes out on Shoreham and makes a right turn on Calvert and enters your ANC across the bridge. down Adams Mill, going eastbound to picking up Columbia, making that left on Columbia and running east on Columbia until they exit your ANC at 16th Street. Time frame, the full closure is about 7:30. We post 7:30 to noon, only because the police control the street openings and the closures. So we give a really wide range. Last year, we cleared out of that area at about 11:30 a.m. So it's pretty quick. And with the smaller field not having the full marathon, it'll be a smaller field than traditionally held. So those runners will be on that course about that time. It's mile 8. So with a really good pace, you'll probably see that first runner, the 8:30 a.m. start, probably that first runner, a little about 8:45, 9 o'clock. You'll see them coming through there. So the police are pretty quick on getting those streets closed early just to make sure they're clear. There's no music in your single ANC. Historically, there was one at the Sun Plaza right there, but that, because of concerns about the loud music, let alone the event, but then the music on top of it, we have taken that out of there, so you won't hear any music. We will put core signs up like we have historically. And the one issue I want to bring your attention is the no parking. MPD requires a clean street course. And so they will restrict parking along Adams Mill and Columbia for the time period of the event. So that's an MPD issue that we are required to share with the ANCs. And that's in a nutshell the event. I know I went over it pretty quickly. I don't know if you have any additional questions. I'm happy to answer anything you need.
Sure, I do have one question. What measures have you or Rock and Roll taken to communicate the road closures with the community?
Well, we have historically done a mailing. I don't know if you've ever
okay.
gotten one, but we normally do like just a kind of a postcard. Hey, this is coming down. These are the times. We also use Waze. They will post all the street closures for people who are trying to get around that day. We have a community line for people who need directions, and that usually comes to me because I know, I live in DC and have been here for quite a long time. So I know how to kind of navigate around some of those closures, especially in your community. I do get calls from the Adams Morgan kind of area, Columbia Heights, that area, trying to get the south side of the event. They live on the north side of the event, they're trying to get south, but we do have a community line that I answer personally. These start coming in about a week before the event. We post on Prince of Petworth. Make sure he puts that up there to make sure people remind them. I know it's in the Washington Post, and we're doing some radio ads as well. I'm happy to post any, blog site that you recommend I hit. I'm happy to do that as well.
Okay, thanks. That was the only question I had. Commissioner Falaskini?
Thanks, Diane. Nice to see you again.
Yes.
I think I'm the only remaining commissioner from the last
Yep.
couple times. So 2 questions. One, towing. I know that's been an issue in the past. You've worked to make sure that police don't tow vehicles, but instead just move them locally instead of impounding them. Can we get your assurances that that will happen again this year?
Yes, they'll be doing friendly moving off the course.
Okay.
But that's what I'm told by MPD, and I will, make sure that you can guarantee I will share that with MPD. I'm also in command for the entire event day of, so if there's any problems, I will definitely leave my cell phone and make sure you guys can reach me right away the day of event. But yes, I will share that with MPD, and I know they have historically not towed; they've just moved.
Okay. Thank you. And then the second thing is noise. This is the Rock and Roll Marathon. So there's music associated with it. That's kind of part of the in the last 2, I believe that you've done, stages were not set in any of our 1C jurisdiction. It
Correct.
Does look like this year there's one that might be on the Duke Ellington Bridge. Is that?
Yeah, that's I was just going to mention that one. Yeah, on Calvert.
So it's going to be on Calvert. And can you just tell us a little bit more about that, the acoustics, anything else that we should know about the times of sound, anything like that would be appreciated.
Sure. The stages usually start when the first runner is coming on. So like I said, you probably see that with an 8:30 start down at 14th and Constitution. And the fast one's about a 5 or 6 minute pace. You're going to see probably I can't do the math quickly, but you're probably going to see them come out of the park a little before 9, maybe 10 till 9 o'clock. And that's when that music will start playing. And it would go into the last runner passes in, which is about the 11 a.m. hour. Now, what band is there? I don't know the name of the band. I can definitely find that out for you, and what kind of music, because we've had other ANCs, especially like in Capitol Hill, when we used to run through Capitol Hill, we would do non-amplified music at the request of the ANC. So if that's something you guys, think based on what kind of music it is, I'm happy to make that, suggestion to the entertainment coordinator.
I would like to suggest that. I can't speak for the rest of the commissioners on here, but I do think that it would make a difference for the neighborhood, especially given that it's on the bridge right there, and it really
Right.
can't project all the way through Rock Creek. So it could also disturb folks that are going out for a quiet walk in the park or
Right.
trying to enjoy the nature of Rock Creek.
Okay.
That it might be good to have non-amplified music up there on the bridge. Is that a south-facing stage on Duke Ellington, or north?
What was the question? I had a dog barking behind me.
Is it a north or a south-facing stage on Duke Ellington?
They're going to be facing actually west.
Oh, okay.
I believe they're going to be set up on that bridge facing as the runners are coming out of the Shoreham.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. There'll be no traffic.
We could even move. I mean, those can be moved as well. So if it's something you think maybe we should move into the park, I mean, maybe like coming off Shoreham. Shoreham's kind of an incline, so it may have to be at the bottom of Shoreham, but it could be something they look at as well. If you want me to make, see if that's something they can do.
No, facing it towards out west, towards 4 or 3, 3D, I guess is that
It's 3C actually.
3C, facing it towards 3C. That's cool. They can deal with the noise. That's fine.
Okay, I'll make, I'll just double check, and I will follow up with an email to you guys just to make sure, at least before I come, before this comes up on February 1st, I'll get some very clear specifics on what's planned right there.
Cool. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And I'm half kidding about facing it towards our neighbors, but also you can tell them.
We face it down to the park, would be even better, I'm sure.
Thank you, Diane.
Are there any more comments from the committee? No. I do see one question from Kristen in the chat. How can we find out where they are all playing? This actually is quite an impressive lineup.
We can get a list. I think they post a list of bands on the site. Once they determine them, I don't know if they've been finalized or not yet.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with Jake. It would be nice if we could have some non-amplified music for the neighborhood. It does sound like they are going to be facing west though, so it probably wouldn't be that loud. Although I've never experienced this race, and I'm not sure how loud it actually is.
I mean, we have to stay within the city ordinance. They have requirements of what decimal, and they do come out this morning and they do check the different stages. So they have a couple different inspectors that are out. We have one on 8th Street for a long time in Northeast, and man, the inspector would literally just stand there the whole time to make sure that knob didn't be turned up too high, because you know how dense 8th Street is. So yeah, so they're definitely out checking to make sure, the band they're not playing louder than they're supposed to be playing at that time.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much for Diane for taking the time to be here tonight. With that, we have wrapped up all of our agenda items. So is there anything else anyone wants to talk about before we close out the meeting? No? Okay, then I close the meeting. It is 7:49 p.m. Thank you everyone for being here.